The haunted streets of New Orleans, true ghost encounters that will scare you, true horror story. The streets of New Orleans have always held a dark secret, whispers of shadows that move when you're not looking, footsteps that echo behind you long after the street is empty. I never believed in ghosts, until the night I walked those haunted streets alone. What I experienced changed me forever, leaving me terrified to return. This is the true story of my encounters with the spirits that refuse to rest. I arrived in New Orleans on a humid evening in late October, the air thick with the smell of decay and the faint tang of something unidentifiable, almost metallic. My name is Daniel Carter, a journalist always in search of stories that challenge the line between reality and myth. I had been sent to cover the city's famed haunted history, but I never expected to experience it firsthand. The moment I stepped out of the bus station, the streets felt different, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. French Quarter streets were narrow and twisting, lined with wrought iron balconies that seemed to lean over the sidewalks, as if the buildings themselves were watching. Shadows clung to the corners like living things, and the distant strains of music from a bar seemed oddly discordant, out of sync with the joviality inside. I checked into a small, aging inn just off Royal Street, run by a woman named Madame Blue, who had an unsettling way of staring too long at guests, as if she could see more than she let on. She handed me an old brass key with a warning: "Do not linger in the streets after midnight." I laughed it off, thinking it was just a quirky local superstition. After all, I had spent my life reporting on paranormal stories and never believed a word of them. Yet there was something in her eyes that made my laughter hollow. I left my bags in the room and decided to walk through the quarter, notebook in hand, hoping to capture the atmosphere for my article. The streets were eerily quiet. The usual throngs of tourists and street performers were replaced by an unsettling stillness, punctuated only by the occasional clatter of a distant gate or the rustle of dead leaves along the cobblestones. The gas lamps flickered, casting elongated shadows that moved independently of any light source. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that some unseen eyes were following my every step. I reached the old St. Louis cemetery, its crumbling walls covered in moss and graffiti. It was said to be one of the most haunted places in the city, and I had come prepared to document the legends. As I crossed the threshold, a cold breeze slithered over my neck, sending shivers down my spine. The tombs were stacked in towering rows, above ground like miniature houses, their inscriptions worn but eerily legible under the pale light of the crescent moon. I wandered deeper into the cemetery, notebook out, jotting down the stories etched into the stones. That's when I first saw it, a figure standing motionless at the far end of the path, shrouded in shadows. I froze, heart hammering. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, yet I felt a presence, heavy and oppressive. It was then that I realized the stories were true. The air itself seemed charged with something malevolent, a lingering residue of suffering and death. I forced myself to take a step forward, convincing myself it was a trick of the light. The figure remained, but as I moved closer, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in front of me, each exhale coming out in visible puffs. A faint whisper reached my ears, unintelligible at first, but unmistakably there. The words seemed to echo from the ground itself, vibrating through the soles of my shoes. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, just stared as the figure slowly began to vanish, dissolving into the mist that had suddenly rolled in around the tombstones. Shaking, I stepped back, nearly tripping over the uneven path. My rational mind raced to explain what I had seen, a trick of the fog, a shadow cast by the iron fence, but deep down I knew it was something else entirely. I could feel the cemetery's energy pressing against me, urging me to leave, yet something compelled me to continue. I needed to see more, to understand what haunted these streets. I exited the cemetery and found myself on an abandoned alley behind Bourbon Street. The sounds of revelry from the nearby bars felt distant, muffled, as if I had stepped into a separate world. The alley was narrow, flanked by tall brick walls covered in mildew. I noticed marks on the walls, scratches that looked almost like claw marks, gouged deep into the bricks. My stomach twisted. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I pressed forward, each step echoing unnaturally loud. That's when I felt it, a presence at my shoulder. I turned sharply, expecting someone to be there, but the alley was empty. My heart raced, every instinct screaming to run, but my curiosity overpowered fear. I continued until I reached the end, where a single, flickering lamp illuminated a doorway. It looked like an entrance to an old speakeasy, long abandoned. The door creaked open by itself, revealing darkness inside. Something drew me in, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. As I stepped across the threshold, the temperature plummeted further, and the air felt thick, almost viscous. I could hear faint breathing, but no one was visible. I tried to retreat, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. Panic surged, yet my feet moved forward. The floor was uneven, littered with broken bottles and debris, each step a crunch that echoed through the hollow space. I finally reached the center of the room, where I saw faint outlines of figures pressed against the walls, barely visible in the dim light. They didn't move, didn't breathe, yet their presence was suffocating. Shadows seemed to twist unnaturally, limbs bending at impossible angles. I could feel them observing me, 100 unseen eyes boring into my soul. My notebook slipped from my hands, landing with a soft thud that sounded deafening in the oppressive silence. Time lost meaning. Minutes or hours could have passed, I had no way to tell. The whispers grew louder, forming words I could almost understand. Pleas, warnings, threats, I wasn't certain which. My body ached, my mind screamed for escape, yet something invisible held me in place. I could feel cold fingers brushing against my arms, my back, my face, though no one was there. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, my skin crawling as if covered in thousands of tiny insects. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the wall, gliding across the floor toward me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. The shadow circled me, then dissipated into the darkness as abruptly as it appeared. In that moment, I realized that these were not mere spirits. They were sentient, aware, and malevolent. The room itself seemed alive, breathing, pulsating with a hatred that I could feel in my bones. Hours, or what felt like hours, later, I stumbled back to the doorway, now open as if nothing had happened. I bolted into the alley, gasping for air, the night sky never more welcoming. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my hotel room, locking the door behind me. I sat on the bed, drenched in sweat, trying to rationalize what had happened. I knew what I saw couldn't be explained away, couldn't be dismissed as imagination or fear. Something in New Orleans streets had chosen to reveal itself to me, and I was not ready for what would come next. I couldn't sleep that night. Every shadow in my room seemed to twitch, every creak of the building sounded like footsteps approaching. I realized that the haunted streets of New Orleans didn't just exist. They were alive, aware, waiting for anyone foolish enough to wander too far into their darkness. I didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning. The city had marked me, and I would carry the memory of that night forever. As dawn broke, I forced myself to write down everything I had witnessed, knowing that this story would change the way people viewed the haunted history of New Orleans. I didn't yet understand the full scope of what I had encountered, but one thing was certain. The streets of this city were not safe, not for anyone, and certainly not for me. And I had no idea what horrors awaited me in the hours to come. The night after my first encounter, sleep was impossible. Every shadow in my hotel room seemed to twitch, every distant creak a whisper calling my name. By midnight, I found myself standing once again on the damp streets of the French Quarter, drawn toward the shadows as if some invisible hand were guiding me. The air was thick, humid, and tinged with an almost metallic scent, sharper than the previous night. I had warned myself I wouldn't return, yet the city seemed to pull me forward, pressing against my chest with every step. I passed the old cemetery gates, the tombstones barely visible in the pale light of the crescent moon. The energy I had felt before was stronger now, tangible, heavy, pressing in on me like a living thing. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure I had seen, the shadow that had followed me through the alley and into the theater. My instincts screamed to leave, yet my curiosity, now mingled with fear, drove me forward. Turning a corner, I noticed a narrow alleyway I had avoided the night before. A faint glow emanated from its end, pulsing, almost breathing. As I approached, I realized the walls were covered with strange symbols etched into the bricks, their lines jagged and uneven, as if carved in a frenzy. My stomach twisted at the thought of the rituals that might have taken place here. I tried to rationalize it, but the hairs on my arms stood on end. I could feel the presence before I saw it. Then, a whisper cut through the night. I couldn't discern the words, only a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to move through the ground into my bones. The alley seemed to close in around me, the walls stretching, elongating unnaturally. Shadows shifted along the surfaces, twisting into grotesque shapes that defied human anatomy. One, larger than the rest, moved closer. It hovered at the edge of the dim light, its hollow eyes fixed on me. Every instinct told me to run, yet my legs froze, anchored to the cobblestones. The figure circled me slowly, and I felt the chill of its presence seep into my skin. It wasn't just a ghost, it was a sentience, aware of my fear, feeding on it. The whispering grew louder, overlapping with other voices, some pleading, some screaming, some laughing. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. The air felt viscous, thick with a presence that seemed to push against my lungs. I realized the city itself was complicit, the very streets alive with memories of the tortured, the lost, and the damned. Suddenly, another figure appeared behind me, closer, colder. Its form wavered, translucent yet solid enough that I could see its twisted features. A hand reached toward my shoulder, icy and pressing, almost tangible. Panic surged through me, adrenaline coursing, but still I could not move. My mind screamed to turn, to escape, but the weight of the shadows kept me rooted in place. The whispers merged into one loud, horrifying cacophony. It wasn't merely sound, it was thought, invasion, a probing into the deepest corners of my mind. Then, without warning, the figures recoiled as if startled, their forms dissolving into smoke. I could feel a vibration beneath my feet, something ancient and predatory awakening. The alleyway seemed to stretch infinitely, twisting and looping back on itself in impossible geometry. I stumbled forward, my flashlight flickering, and the faint glow ahead revealed a door I had never noticed before, carved from dark, rotting wood and inscribed with runes that made my vision blur. Compelled beyond reason, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was vast and black, seemingly larger than the building itself. Shadows clung to every corner, writhing like living things. The temperature dropped further, my breath freezing in clouds before me. I could feel countless eyes on me, invisible, waiting. Then I saw them, figures pressed against the walls, pale, skeletal, some missing eyes or limbs, their mouths open in silent screams. They weren't moving, yet they were alive with malevolence. I realized I had crossed a threshold, entering a place outside the normal world, a nexus for the tortured spirits of New Orleans. As I moved through the room, a shadow detached itself from the far wall, coalescing into a humanoid form. It hovered inches above the ground, tilting its head in a grotesque, mocking manner. My stomach lurched as I felt its gaze pierce through me, probing, searching, assessing. I could feel my sanity fraying under its attention. The air thickened, making every breath a struggle. The whispers returned, this time more coherent, reciting names, dates, and events that chilled me to the bone. They spoke of pain, betrayal, murder, and the countless souls that had been trapped in this city, unable to move on. I tried to flee, my body finally obeying the instinct that had been suppressed by terror. The shadows reacted, stretching and lashing toward me like living tendrils. They grazed my skin, cold and rough, leaving impressions that burned even after I pulled away. I stumbled toward the door, finally escaping the room and running into the night, gasping for breath, every nerve on fire. The streets were empty, silent, but I knew better than to believe in safety. The city itself had witnessed my transgression and had marked me as one of its own. For the next week, I stayed locked in my room, haunted by visions and sounds that seemed to seep from the very walls. Every shadow became a threat, every whisper a reminder of my encounter. I tried to leave the quarter, but it was no use. The streets seemed to warp, bending me back toward the heart of the haunted district. I realized that New Orleans didn't just hold spirits, it held memories, malevolent and persistent, feeding on the curiosity of the living. My experience had tethered me to them, whether I liked it or not. Eventually, I began documenting everything I had seen, my notebook filled with frenzied accounts, sketches of the symbols, descriptions of the figures, and every detail I could remember. Yet no matter how much I wrote, the pull of the haunted streets was irresistible. Every night, the shadows returned, and I felt their presence in every corner, every flicker of light. They were patient, cunning, and aware, always waiting for the moment I would slip, for the night I would stray too far again. I learned to navigate the quarter with caution, avoiding the streets after midnight, respecting the warnings that had once seemed quaint. But even now, years later, I cannot walk alone in the dark. Shadows linger at the edges of my vision, whispers haunt my dreams, and I know that the city has not forgotten me. New Orleans is alive, and it remembers every soul who dares to walk its haunted streets. I survived, but only just. The ghosts are patient, and one day, they will claim those who underestimate them. Even writing this now, I feel them watching, waiting, reminding me that some stories are not meant to be told, and some streets are never safe. I have crossed the threshold into a world most cannot perceive, and the haunted streets of New Orleans have left their mark on me forever. I am a witness, but the shadows have made it clear, they are always here, and they never forgive. If this story left you shivering, know that New Orleans hides horrors most will never see. I lived through its haunted streets, and the shadows still linger. If you want more chilling tales that will keep you awake at night, hit like, comment, and subscribe. Step carefully into the darkness. You never know what might be watching, waiting, and remembering.